Imagination Escape ASMR. Hello, my lovelies. Today's video is just gonna be some cozy vibes of us hanging out and me reading you trip reports from Erowid. In case you don't know what Erowid is, it's this website where a lot of information about different substances is collected, and they have a lot of people have written about their experiences with different substances there. So grab a drink. I have my very brightly colored orange juice here. Or lie down if you're trying to get to sleep. And let's get into reading these trip reports. And I must preface this video by saying that I am not making this to encourage people to use any kind of substances, whether legal or illegal. I just find this kind of stuff so damn interesting. Drugs are literally my special interest. Yeah. And I'm gonna have to see how this works because I am gonna be reading the trip reports from my laptop, which I am also using to, I also have my microphone plugged in to my laptop. So I hope that, I don't accidentally hit the wires that are connecting these and accidentally stop recording, because that sometimes happens. If I touch the wire, then it's like the USB thing and then it stops recording. But anyway, I have not looked up any of these trip reports in advance. I'm just gonna look here on the website and see what seems interesting. So also to go with the theme of today's video, I have these Amanita muscaria earrings that I love. They have a little heart and then the big mushroom. Full substance list. What kind of substance do we want to read about? Well, maybe I should just go to what are the most popular ones? Peyote, that's kind of an interesting one. 2CB, caffeine. Actually, let's see what caffeine has. Let me see combinations. Because on this website, the trip reports are categorized. So there's general, first times, combinations, retrospective / summary, preparation / recipes, difficult experiences, bad trips, health problems, train wrecks and trip disasters, addiction and habituation, glowing experiences, mystical experiences, health benefits, families, medical use. What was in that? I'm gonna see combinations. There is Unexpected Ego Death by Dr. Seuss, and it says cacao, cannabis and alcohol. That seems kind of interesting. So I'm just gonna read that. I don't know if these are gonna be interesting or not interesting, but I'm just reading some stuff, and I hope it'll be cool. So yeah, let's see. This doesn't seem to be okay. Yeah, it is decently long. Yeah. Let us read this. Last night I had quite an unusual experiences. I had a trip, including what I believe was partial ego death, brought on by a moderate amount of alcohol, cannabis, and inability to sleep. But the trip only occurred when I closed my eyes, and I was able to effectively stop the trip at any time by opening my eyes. For background, the first time I tried LSD was in my senior year of high school. I experimented with LSD for about a year after that, trying confident that the reason for the bad trip was improper setting, but from the intensity of the experience, I had no desire to use psychedelics even with better planning in the future. Fast forward 6 years. For various reasons, I'm now interested in experimenting with psychedelics again, with my main goals being to improve my emotional health, interpersonal skills, and mindfulness. I got some mushrooms and have been using them in small doses, from microdoses to 1 gram, for the past month to gradually become used to more intense trips. I'm now going to describe the events leading up to this trip. Given how strange the circumstances of this trip were, I think these details are important to mention. For the entire week, I had been working long hours on a project for work, and my sleep schedule had gotten pushed back a bit from staying up late to work. I was getting 6 to 7 hours of sleep per night, which compared to my usual 8 to 9 left me feeling exhausted every day when I came home from work. On Friday, the night of the trip, my exhaustion led me to fall asleep from around 7 to 8 p.m. Another important detail is that I was particularly sensitive to caffeine, as I had quit caffeine about a week ago. I was taking 50 mg a day before that. My roommate had left out some cacao chips from some brownies he had baked the previous night, and without thinking about it, I ate around 10 while I was in the kitchen microwaving some food to eat after the nap. Around 10 p.m., I vaped a small amount of cherry diesel, a stimulating strain of cannabis mixed with an indica strain of hemp known as special sauce. During this high, I had a number of significant thoughts, including a realization relating to my career goals, which I had been thinking about for years. I mention this for completeness, but don't think it was related to the events that followed. Later that night, I got in bed around 1 a.m., but as I soon realized, the combination of the nap, my caffeine sensitivity, and the cacao chips had completely throttled my ability to sleep, even though I felt completely out of it. I laid there for a while and read a few articles on my phone to pass the time, getting up to use the bathroom every so often. At some point, which I think was around 3 a.m., I went downstairs to have some alcohol, roughly 1 shot of spiced rum, which I thought might help based on past experience. I felt quite buzzed. I am very sensitive to both alcohol and cannabis, but was still unable to sleep. At 4 a.m., the latest I had been up in around 2 years, my frustration grew and I decided to up the ante. I took some purple punch cannabis, a strain known for inducing sleep and euphoria, and vaped around 1.2 grams, which I knew would get me quite baked. And then I drank more spiced rum, around 1.5 to 2 shots worth, although I didn't measure it. Very shortly after I laid down again, I noticed very powerful euphoria in my entire body. I remember in particular an ASMR type sensation in my forehead, which I often get while meditating, and very deep relaxation in my legs. Shortly after this, I also felt an orgasmic sensation in my stomach, a feeling I occasionally feel after taking cannabis, but I'm not sure how to trigger. At this point, I started feeling a sensation which is difficult to describe, but to do my best, it felt as if my mental field of view, with my eyes closed, was spinning. As soon as I felt this, I realized that I was beginning to have a psychedelic experience. When I was experimenting with psychedelics 6 years ago, I had noticed that cannabis sometimes brought very mild trips, but this had stopped happening to me long ago. So while I was surprised to find myself tripping, I didn't get scared or anxious. I shifted my goal from falling asleep to engaging in the trip. However, it quickly became apparent that this trip was different. The intensity increased far beyond what I had experienced from any other cannabis-induced trip. I was still in the driver's seat for the trip, in the sense that I could choose not to engage with it. When I opened my eyes, I was still baked, but not tripping. I think I verified this pretty soon after I noticed I was tripping. but I was interested to see what kind of experiences I would have, so I decided to keep my eyes closed and go deeper into the trip. This is when what I consider to be the main culmination of the trip happened. At some point I meditated on nothingness, trying to imagine life before and after death. And the universe before the Big Bang. This triggered my brain to go into a kind of overdrive. The sensation in my forehead became more intense, and with each second I felt less awareness of my body, as if it were painlessly dissolving. My closed eye field of view was filled with a network of red filaments evolving randomly over a black void. At this point, I was a bit scared, but the last fragment of my existence decided to go deeper rather than opening my eyes. And the result was what I believe was a kind of partial ego death. Time seemed to not exist, and my existence was filled with nothing but the red filaments. I had no awareness of myself or my body. I heard the words, "This is it," repeatedly. I think that I heard these words because in the seconds before the culmination, I realized I might be heading toward an ego death experience, and that "this is it" may have been my last thought before I entered this void. I describe this as a partial ego death for two reasons. First, I believe part of my subconscious was still there, because even though I wasn't aware of myself, I was aware of fear. And second, the fact that I heard "this is it" means that I could still understand language, even though I wasn't aware of myself. I am guessing that in a true ego death, one cannot understand language, although I am not sure of this. I'm not sure how long the ego death lasted, but I would guess 30 seconds to a minute. At some point, I began to regain awareness of my body while still seeing the filament network. My awareness continued to increase until, with my eyes still closed, I no longer saw the filaments. At the spinning visualization again. At this point, I opened my eyes and took stock of what just happened. I had never experienced ego death before, so I believe this was the most intense psychedelic experience I had ever had, without actually taking a psychedelic. I was quite calm, in fact, a bit excited, but also extremely terrified of what I had seen, and immediately pulled out my phone and started writing down notes on what had happened. I think it was around 4:20 a.m. After this, I closed my eyes and continued the trip. I'm not sure if I could have entered the ego lost state again, but I decided in advance that I wouldn't enter it if I felt it coming on. I continued meditating on nothingness, and this continued to bring an extremely intense visualizations and sensations. I don't remember the exact order of things, but a few of the things I felt/saw were out-of-body experiences, including one in which I left my body and went into space, strange perceptions of my body, intense fractal zooms. I had never seen anything like this before. It's what I imagined DMT would look like. Some scary things, not writing them down to avoid jogging my memory. Nothing truly terrifying though. I chose to keep my eyes closed. At some point I became somewhat paranoid that the trip wouldn't end, but I convinced myself that this was nonsense. A few times I was about to drift off to sleep, which would lead to the trip rapidly increasing in intensity and jolting me awake. Through all of this, except at the moment of ego death, I felt that I could open my eyes at any time to pause the trip, and I did a few times. The default state of my body, when I wasn't feeling some strange sensation, felt heavily euphoric. At some point I fell asleep and woke up around 11 a.m. feeling very much out of it, but not tired enough to go back to sleep. To summarize, I had a trip induced by cannabis and alcohol, which resulted in what I believe was partial ego death. But the trip only occurred while I closed my eyes, so I could pause it at any time by opening my eyes. I also had some control over the trip, e.g., "this fractal is scary, let's change it." I was scared at a few points, but was calm the whole time and kept my eyes closed for almost all of the experience. My guess is that the combination of all three of alcohol, cannabis, and sleeplessness was what led to this strange trip. If this method of tripping is reproducible, I would consider using it again. It was amazing to have so much control over the trip. That was very interesting, I think. The experience year is 2021. Gender male, age at time of experience 25, published January 9, 2022. So that was a pretty recent experience. It was cool. Not like, obviously not the craziest trip report I've ever read, but really interesting. I think probably that person's sleeplessness affected the trip a lot, because like some really crazy stuff can happen when you're like sleep deprived, even if you've taken like even if you haven't taken any substances. Like I know one friend of mine just started full on hallucinating when she was like really sleep deprived and just couldn't get to sleep. She started seeing these like dark figures in her room and everything. It sounded really scary when she told me about it. Let's see. Can I go back? Let's read some mushroom trip reports. There's on the addiction and habituation thing, because for some reason I got interested in it. There's a trip report called Quitting Smoking, and it is mushrooms and nicotine withdrawal. Let's see how long this is. Let's just read this and see what it is like. So, called Quitting Smoking by Paradoxical. A note to the reader. I was still tripping when I wrote this. Okay, that's a good preface. Let's see. Yeah. A note to the reader. I was still tripping when I wrote this. The first section is about quitting smoking. The second is about the trip and goes into the discovery I made into human brain chemistry. I will divide them because reading a long and detailed report about quitting smoking isn't the most interesting thing in the world. Let me give you some information on the situations leading up to this night. I've been smoking for 3 years. It's a bitch of a habit. It's really bad for you. We've heard it all. We've all said that we can quit, but there's just no reason, etc., etc. But every day we find ourselves down at the store buying a pack of butts. Your friends are making fun of you. You said that before. Your relatives bother you. Your non-smoking friends might tell you to stop. I finally got the chance of a lifetime. I got offered $1,000 to quit. The deal was, if I'd quit the next day, I'd get $1,000. That's definitely worth it in my mind, especially since my friend had told me 3 days earlier that she was offered the same deal. She declined and has been cursing herself for it since. It's funny how few of us act toward the long term in favor of the short term. I'm glad there was this short term motivation to kick this long term habit. So I smoked my last few cigarettes, trying to get every last bit of enjoyment out of them. Salem, Marlboro, Salem, Camel, Winston, Parliament. I had every kind of cigarette with me just to have some sort of variety in life. I enjoyed them, just sitting around, having a great conversation with a friend, like the best of cigarettes were. I had my very last one at around 8 p.m. The rest of the night was fine. I woke up the next day, and it was tough. No morning cigarette, no cigarette after a meal. There was a higher motivation to it all. I wrote $1,000 on a salim and puffed on it. Didn't smoke it though. I knew that if I smoked it, it would be like smoking $1,000. And what would the point of that be? I could keep smoking and hide it. I have a friend who did that for years, but I realized this was the time to stop. I also consider myself a scientist of sorts. As Terence McKenna put it, an explorer may be a better definition. If I am given a chance to figure out something that will link just one more piece of the puzzle of life together, then I'm happy. Here, I saw my chance. I read online a lot, and I stumbled upon an article about nicotine withdrawal causing an endogenous MAOI type activity, which had something to do with tribulin levels in rat brains. Well, I thought, this would be the perfect time to figure out if this is true in humans. Also, I'll be able to figure out if there's a way to have a safe MAOI for an ayahuasca mixture that's naturally procured, as well as learning whether an MAOI potentiates tryptamines or just changes the nature of the experience. So I seized the opportunity. Never did I expect what was actually to occur. 3 days prior to this, I combined MDMA and mushrooms for the first time in my life. It was an amazing experience. I learned so much about myself and overcame deep-seated fears which I had previously decided I would not face. It's tough not to change when you are confronted with such harsh truth and a situation which will bring it to light, as well as opportunities to change it. However, that's besides the point. The point of this paragraph was supposed to be that I had taken the mushrooms before and knew their potency. They were very body-oriented during the beginning of the trip, but would get much more intense mentally later on. A gram on an empty stomach was good for a decent trip. So after I got these mushrooms, a very crazy situation indeed, with numerous police encounters, me and my friends start going back to the house. We end up going the wrong way on the highway after originally going the right, was due to so many different types of confusion, which encapsulated a crazy day, turned to night, all for the love of mushrooms. At that, I decided to consume around a gram on an empty stomach. While I was eating them, I realized that this was going to be quite the trip if the MAO inhibition were actually to happen. Fortunately, it did. I understood at that time that it was going to be quite the mental conflict, tripping while trying to quit smoking. What I did not understand at the time was all of the factors involved, which I do now. They were as follows. If I smoke a cigarette, I lose $1,000. I took 2 little shrooms to really make me trip hard, so my trip was resting on the potentiation. If I smoked a cigarette, it would be like wasting all those shrooms I just ate, and by not smoking one, I would be propelled into a trip harder than I could imagine. A lot of people, including me, have the immediate reaction to smoke a cigarette when they're in distress, when they're tripping too hard, just to bring them back into the world. On top of all this, I'm having the worst and last nicotine craving of my life. As I start to come up on the shrooms, the situation in which I'm in becomes more and more apparent to me by the second. The situation dynamics playing themselves out. I'm down in my room and start to peak. The situation becomes more and more insane. My keyboard doesn't work, so I'm typing with my mouse. The people I'm with are talking. I feel that I am insulting them. They're about to leave. What am I to do now? What am I to do later? The situation gets more and more ridiculous by the second. As I want a cigarette more and more, I start to trip harder and harder. The more frustrated I am, the harder I trip. The futility of this endless cycle is apparent. I still want a cigarette, but I know I cannot have one. I trip harder and harder and harder. I feel like I'm near Picasso painting. That is the only way to describe it. Every thought I am having, every situational dynamic, every single thing is getting crazier and more incomprehensible by the second. My desire for a cigarette is endless. Objects are morphing, changing colors. Sounds don't sound the same. I'm feeling them. A confusing sense of multi-dimensional synesthesia was the only thing I could feel. Everything connecting from the principle of disconnection. Is it even possible? Was this insanity ever going to stop? Did I care? No, I fucking loved it. At that moment, I realized that I could actually love the feeling of not having a cigarette. I love tripping. I may be young, under 18, that's all you need to know, but the impressions on my mind which I left after a good trip are completely unmatched by anything. After all, haven't we all wondered what it was like to live the life of abstract art? Well, let me tell you, it's a wonderful life. Smoking may be a habit that I enjoyed, but the mushrooms are always going to be my favorite. They're healthier anyways. Whenever I want a cigarette, eat a mushroom. Sounds good to me. Well, the rest of the night was disappointing. I left the house, tripping harder than I ever had. The most recent experience is always the strongest. Is it just memory, or am I pushing my limits every time? By the time I got to the gas station to meet my friends, the cigarette smoke in the air, though it was a feeling of physical relief, was bringing my trip down, never to come back at such extreme levels. I would say it was unfortunate, but I had a fun night. Friends are always good to be around. Perhaps I can inspire them to quit as well. Who knows? As I said, I am a scientist of sorts, out exploring the unknown in everyday life. Well, after trekking the depths and heights of an amazing combination, mushrooms and quitting smoking as an MAO inhibitor, I can say that I am quite pleased at the outcome. A trip is always a good way to set my mind for something, and a quit smoking trip is perfect. Not only am I rewarded by not having a cigarette with a more intense trip, which will allow me to break the thought cycle of having a cigarette because I'm overwhelmed by something, etc. I get a cheaper trip and infinite potentiation from a completely free natural source. Talk about good deals, this is the best one I've ever had. I don't know how long this will last, but I plan to take advantage of it as often as possible. I'm going to miss wanting a cigarette because of what it does. Psychedelic drugs all depend on environment, setting. We've heard it over and over again. The trip can be brought down to a comparative nothing just by breathing in cigarette smoke from the air around me, or it can be propelled into the most surreal abstract adventure of a lifetime, year, month, week, whatever your preference may be, just by staying away from cigarette smoke. I've always had trouble concluding things. I feel I always have more to say or left something out, always something wrong. However, for the first time, I feel differently. All I can hope for is that people will read this and decide to kick the habit, as well as give something back to the ever-growing knowledge database that exists on the internet. Open your mind to new experiences and always be the explorer. It's truly the best way to live. End report. However, I would like to note some things that may or may not have been related to that in particular. I took those same mushrooms at a higher dose the next 2 nights after that. I felt like I was living 2 lives, one in reality and one in the mushrooms. Mushroom all at the same time. They are both separate and completely interactable, but still there. That lasted for 4 days. I felt this state more intensely whenever I wanted a cigarette. Take care and explore. Oh, and quit butts if you're motivated to do so. You wouldn't believe how much better life is without them. Experience year 2003. Gender male. Age and time of experience not given. Published September 20, 2006. Let me have a sip of my orange juice. That's some good orange juice. still dripping. I think I could tell it at some parts, like knowing that it was written while the person was still dripping. I could see it a little bit, I think, but if I didn't know that, I probably wouldn't think anything of it. I've already been filming for half an hour, but I want to read one last thing. I think I want to read a bad trip story. Let's see. Let's do LSD. Let's see. Or difficult experiences or bad trips. I want to do bad trips. Okay, I will read this one that is called Insanity, Death, Years of Rebuilding, Peace, by Troy C. And the substances are LSD and hash. If LSD or another psychedelic has left you tangled, confused, afraid, and tormented, breathe. In time, the trauma will unravel. You have found a difficult path, but you are okay. Living will still have beauty. You are not alone. I have seen total eclipse without hope of day. It took years, but I am happy with a loving partner and a healthy, sane life. I am a better, more aware, more caring, and happier person than I would have been without these experiences. I would not change the choices I've made. It started with 2 hits of blue microdot. The 16 hours or more of tripping was only the beginning. It took years for me to stitch myself back together. I ate 1.5 hits of LSD and I infilled another half. Then I smoked about 0.2 grams of hash. Already I felt uneasy that something wasn't right. It didn't take long before nothing was right. It is unexplainable. Beyond a thought or feeling or sense, a door opened. I was flooded with a new seeing. I was unprepared and resisted. This is when I met with insanity. I won't go into the details of my complex and confused mind. It still gives me shivers. I'll just say that without a doubt that I was now insane and going to stay that way for the rest of my life. Metaphors grew out of nothing. A string of strange coincidences and some strong acid made me believe that I was suddenly in on some syndicate that operated on a psychic level through metaphors and feelings. I was being welcomed into the circle. Insanity was a network. I didn't want to be a part of it. But it was too late. Then I realized I wasn't insane, but dead. I had overdosed on LSD. I now know this is impossible, and I was riding in limbo, needing to choose heaven or hell. My cousin, who I was close to all my life, was cool with smoking cigarettes, weed, and was high on the same LSD, having a great time with it, I might add, became to me a manifestation of Satan. My older brother, who was as clean as they come and totally naive to drugs, became to me a manifestation of Jesus. Of course, I followed him around all night, bugging the shit out of him to take me to heaven. This scared the ever-living shit out of him. At one point, I pissed my pants on purpose to try and convince myself I was still alive. But the trip had roots, and that was not enough to snap me out of it. I I was willing to do anything he suggested. However, with his inexperience, he would tell me to do things like go to sleep, go lay down in my room with the lights off. There, my body would feel as though it was disappearing, that I was slipping into hell. I wish now that I would have let go and experienced my inner workings. I leapt out of bed and did anything I could think of to get to heaven. I even tried calling my parents who were away on vacation. I went through my peak doing these random and frantic things, as I was certain I was going to fall into hell at any moment. The night was long. As my cousin and I came down from our trips, he ultimately talked me into finally going to bed and getting some sleep. I don't recall if I actually ever slept. He left the next afternoon. What is most formative and important is the week, and then years afterward, a journey few people will ever make in this life. The first week I spent afraid, confused, unable to eat or sleep, alone in a true dementia. I'd watch television and it would be spewing messages directly to me. Everything was a metaphor for heaven or hell, or a message from the syndicate. I began to believe this blanket of metaphor was a secret code that the world spoke, and I was getting hip to it. Going down to strawberry fields. Still, nothing really made sense. All a jumble. One night that week, I went to a friend's house and believed every sentence they said to one another was linked to my dementia. Another close friend, who definitely knew I was in trouble, said that he believed life was a test, and that everything had a reasonable and rational answer. Don't know if that's absolutely true, but it snapped me into my first taste of reality in over a week. I decided it was time to drive home to my parents' house to reconcile my mind. I entered the house not really knowing what to say or do. I began telling them about this experience I had, telling them that I had achieved a higher state of consciousness, etc. They looked frightened and confused. I realized that so was I. Suddenly I broke down, began telling them about my use of LSD, marijuana, and other drugs, how I was out of my mind, paranoid and afraid. Just the facts. My mother cried, and my father listened stone silent. That night was the most relieving and uplifting of my life. Likely the most difficult for my parents. All they could do was listen and hug me. This, ladies and gents, was way out of their league. I knew it. I knew I was teaching them. What mattered was that I was in a place where I was loved and accepted. I was 16 years old and I slept on the floor at the foot of their bed. I released all my secrets. If there is a sacred confession, this was it. I was cleansed by fire. I felt as though I rose from ashes, and I did. That night I was utterly humbled and humiliated by existence. I was a child again, but also evolved. The next week I didn't leave my parents' house. I helped them with various jobs and house projects. If I found spare time, I'd find something to fill it. It was like every day I died and re-awoke. Every day I teetered between heaven and hell. Small decisions like which juice shall I buy and drink were wrapped in meaning and a metaphor that extended beyond daily life, seemingly deciding my eternal fate. Just under everything was a mechanism, a test or a plot, unraveling. I saw powers that we are all capable of, the power to live or to die any moment. I began seeing through the facades of judgment and morality. My learned belief systems eroded and were replaced with experience. I'd raise my concerns with a close friend who had had similar experiences. He would console me, encourage me to believe in what was in front of me, work with what I knew, and be wise not to open up these thoughts to the wrong people, as most would just label me insane and become afraid of me. He was of course totally right and a good friend for his patience and protection. For a time, I lived my life shadowing my true thoughts and feelings about daily situations. I made some stunning life decisions. I traveled overseas alone to search my soul and mind. I shed all my addictions, tobacco, TV, caffeine, sex, all drugs, and even meat/processed foods. This was all between the ages of 16 and 23. It took me over a year till I could even talk to my cousin again. Many more till I could truly trust him. I wish that databases such as Erowid, the Schumer, etc. existed when I went through this journey. Their help could have turned this vicious, horrific, and difficult experience into something meaningful and useful from the beginning. Much of my delusions weren't so at all. This life, this existence, is a blanket of meaning and metaphor. Everything we see, touch, hear is a creation of our own perceptions. This can drive you mad or make you powerful, exalted, and blissful. I am 27 as I write this. The lessons and impressions left by the LSD trip, the full week of dementia, and the years of re-evaluating evolved me to a state of consciousness few ever reach. I am at peace with myself and my existence. I don't want to die, but I am virtually unafraid of it. I see through the bullshit of war, violence, and destruction. I see and participate in peace. I believe we all wish to. LSD helped push these to the front of my consciousness. I had to go through hell, but these moments I now live are truly awake and free. To this day, I wonder if I'm actually alive or if I'm alone, a drifting consciousness, lingering in an endless construct of my own imagination. It doesn't matter really. I found peace. Oh, those last lines gave me some chills. Experience year 1995. So this is a long, old story. Gender male, age and time of experience not given. Published January 25th. I'm messing up. Published June 25th, 2005. Oh, my legs are hurting because I've been sitting in the same position for over 40 minutes. I think this will be it for the trip reports this time, because I really need to not sit any longer. But I hope you enjoyed this video. It takes surprisingly long to read one of those, even though it doesn't look that long. Yeah, and this last story definitely sounds like the guy had a really rough time. Sounds like he had some drug-induced psychosis, I think. But I'm glad that he is better now, and I hope that he's still doing good. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you would like me to make more trip report videos, I could make some more in the future. I could maybe, if I make a second part to this, I could, look up some trip reports beforehand to find some really interesting ones. Not to say that these ones that I read weren't interesting, but they weren't anything like super duper crazy. But yeah,